Hello, everyone. Today I'm going to be talking about debating new affirmatives. So this will start to happen more and more as you get further in your debate career. So it's an important thing to go ahead and prepare for. One of the most important things you can do is to prepare yourself ahead of the tournament. When you're debating new Affs, it is really, really important to have an extensive knowledge of what you've got in the box. You want to be able to find things quickly. You want to have a knowledge of everything that you have that might apply, so you can make the best strategic choices based on what you've got. So there are a couple of components that go into this. The first is knowing broadly where things are going to be in your Dropbox. Dropbox organization is really important. So making sure you're familiar with naming conventions, so the way people name things in your Dropbox, where things are going to be organized in your Dropbox, and where you're going to be able to find generic things like impact defense, so that you can find those things quickly. Speaking of impact defense, knowing the organization of your impact defense file is going to be really important. It's kind of one of the big things you're going to have against a new affirmative. And knowing where you're going to be able to find the defense in your file against a specific affirmative is going to be really important so that you can have quick and easy defensive arguments on the case, even if you're less familiar with the affirmative. Another thing that's going to be really important is knowing about impact turns. In a debate where you might not have a lot of arguments about the internal links that the advantages present, and you might not have a lot to say about the affirmative mechanism in general, an impact turn is a great way to get yourself back in the game, so that you don't have to worry as much about the specifics of the affirmative and can focus more on a debate that you're more familiar with. So knowing about what impact turns you have as a team and what impact turns you've kind of prepared yourself ahead of time is going to be most important. Finally, you're going to want to have a mastery of the files that are in your Dropbox. That does not just mean that you have skimmed the file, that you know it exists, that you've opened it once before. It means an in-depth knowledge about what the file says, what cards are included in the file, what strategic benefit a file has, ways that you can apply that file against a variety of different affirmatives, and making sure that you have read through it, asked questions to the person who wrote that file so that you have an in-depth idea about anything you might think of related to the file, and that you have comfortability with new arguments and arguments that have been in your box so that you can go for those in any given debate. So it's going to be really important to go ahead and do a careful read of every file that gets turned out by your team, by your teammates, by your coaches, so that you know when you are put in a new debate situation that you've got these back files that you can rely on, that you can articulate specifically in the context of a new affirmative, even if you haven't spent a ton of time preparing that document against the affirmative in general. Knowing what all arguments you have in the box is also really important. One way to keep track of this is to keep a master list. So I like to keep a running list throughout the year that includes a list of arguments within the different categories, so like the disads, the critiques, the counterplans, etc., so that if I'm putting together a 1NC in a new debate, I can quickly skim that list and I can look at what are some things I might have forgotten that we had that didn't come to mind immediately that I could utilize in this debate. Preparing to debate new Affs is an active process. It requires that you stay on top of the affirmatives that are being read, think about the logical progressions of those affirmatives. So what's the next step? What's the next nuance that someone might put onto it? What is the new advantage? And thinking about kind of what you would do in those situations. What would you do to answer the different iterations of that potential affirmative? Talking to your coaches and teammates about this are going to be really great because especially coaches and older teammates are going to have a better sense of the direction that topics move in, so they can kind of help guide you in thinking about the broad stuff that is going to be happening in any given topic. So your opponent has declared a new Aff. Time to panic. Just kidding. You still know how to debate. You still know all of the things that you knew in any given debate where your opponent has declared the same old Aff that they were reading at any given time. So take a deep breath. Don't forget that you know plenty about debate that has prepared you to be in this situation. The first thing to do is make sure you're utilizing your prep time effectively. Something I always found myself getting lost with was what to do with the like 45 minutes ahead of a debate where, you know, I didn't know what the affirmative was going to be in a time when I would normally be doing things kind of specific to what that affirmative is. Don't just sit around and freak out. This is the time to start thinking strategically about the other team. What type of affirmative is this team likely to read? Is this a team that consistently reads soft-left affirmatives? Do you think it'll be a new iteration of that? Do they traditionally read very big stick affirmatives that are core of the topic and will link to lots of stuff? Does this team traditionally read planless Affs? What kind of spin do you think they might put on that? Next, think about what generic arguments am I most comfortable adapting into a new debate? If you've done the first step of preparing effectively, that should be everything you have access to. But we're all imperfect people, so you might have some arguments that you're just more familiar with that you think will be able to apply in a broader swath of situations. So thinking about kind of what positions you are most ready to go for. What new generic arguments that are going to apply to a lot of different Affs do we have that I could break? This is a discussion to be having with coaches. What arguments are they comfortable with you breaking? Is this a situation where if you get to it and an argument applies, your coaches are totally okay with you breaking anything that's in the box? Are there still restrictions on things you can be saying? What arguments did they think you're most prepared for? And what arguments have you truly prepared to read? Just because an argument is new doesn't mean that it is the best argument if you are not ready to extend it. Obviously, the way to kind of get around that issue is to make sure that you've prepared to read the new arguments that have been put out for any given tournament. But things happen, so be realistic with yourself about your chances of winning a debate, extending an argument that you may not be comfortable with. A next step to take is open your necessary files. So there are some files that just take minutes to open and always kind of make my word wonky for a couple of minutes. Things like the impact defense file or major files that like have a lot of generic arguments about the topic. That might be the kind of stuff you want to open ahead of time. Finally, take a deep breath. You know how to debate. Don't let the stress of debating a new affirmative freak you out to the point where you are no longer comfortable doing the things you know how to do. As the debate starts, your primary goal is to understand the 1AC. In order to develop a coherent and effective 2&R strategy, you need to know what's going on. It's really important to have an idea of what the 1AC is saying and what you think an effective 2&R strategy is. This does not mean figuring out everything you can put in a 1NC. This means thinking strategically about what you want to be going for at the end of this debate. It's important to have an established division of labor between you and your partner. So what I mean by this is when you're creating a 1NC in this time-pressed situation, you want to be utilizing your partner effectively. For me, that meant that I put a sheet of paper between my partner and I during the 1AC. I wrote down off-case positions that I wanted my partner to put in the 1NC, and my partner compiled those. As my partner was doing that, I would be putting together case arguments, reading the cards in the 1AC so that I could make logical analytical presses against the weakest parts of the case, deciding what I think is most important. Do I need, do they have a few core impacts and I want to have strong impact defense to those, or do they have a proliferation of a ton of impacts and it might be more strategic to press on the internal links that they're using to get to those that might be less true. New Aff 1NCs are a fine balance of analytics and cards, where you might traditionally have the instinct to just throw a bunch of cards in there. You have to think about being time pressed, and you have to think about being smart. So this is going to be a great time to kind of get familiar with what are kind of the important and strategic places to press on this. One thing to think about is, what does this Aff seem set up to do? Is this 1AC set up so that it is really good at answering one kind of position? You might be a debater that always goes for the state's counterplan, and they might have written the 1AC that breaks the state's counterplan. At that point, you have to think about, what can I do strategically to get them out of their comfort zone? Because with a new Aff, they have put you out of your comfort zone, so you kind of have to return the favor, throwing them off of their feet so that you can gain control of the direction of the debate once again. Another thing is figuring out, what do you need to ask in cross-ex to understand the affirmative? Something that I think a lot of people forget is, in new debates, the judges might also not entirely know what the affirmative is saying or what's going on right away. So don't care about looking stupid or asking stupid questions or asking questions that seem unstrategic in a way that you might traditionally care about in your average debate, because if you know what the affirmative is ahead of time, you kind of can have the time to figure out what the Aff does on your own and don't need to ask those open-ended questions as much. But in this type of debate, you might need to ask some open-ended questions to figure out what is going on and what the Aff is specifically saying. So don't worry about your cross-ex being as strategic as you might normally worry about. The next step that is extremely important is to take prep. I know a lot of people hesitate to take prep early in the debate. I'm one of those people, but you want to take as much prep as you need before the 1NC to make a 1NC that has winning 2NRs in it. And you want to know ahead of time what those winning 2NRs are, so that you are not on the spot trying to figure out what you're going to go for and salvage a 1NC that has a bunch of unapplicable stuff in it. Your 1NC, you want to do a couple of things. You want to check it out before you send it. You want to make sure that there aren't double turns, that there's adequate coverage, that it's the right length, and you shouldn't be afraid to adapt if necessary. If your partner is reading the 1NC and you realize, oh, I have a much better argument to make on case because I've read through more of their evidence and I have a better idea of what it says, then don't be afraid to kind of bring it up to your partner and say, here's the thing that I want you to say here. You also want to be thinking about your ideal 2NR. I know I've said this before in this lecture, but it's really the most important part of constructing these 1NCs, is you're not just constructing 1NC to get it out there and get the speech over with. You're constructing a 1NC that has in mind the ideal 2NR that you are going to go for. Your instinct might be something like this, but your instinct should lean towards, what is the best argument I can make against this affirmative, not how can I possibly include every single argument in my Dropbox so that I can figure it out later. Figure it out now and it will reward you later. The rest of the debate is going to be pretty similar to any given debate. Once you kind of set up your 1NC and once you kind of set yourself up for a winning 2NR, you're going to debate pretty similarly. A couple of tips that you kind of want to keep in mind are, stay organized. You want to make sure that you are not letting the chaos of new affirmatives prevent you from doing the things that you would do in any given debate. Doing your line by line effectively, answering every argument, kicking out of the positions you need to kick out of effectively and efficiently, keeping everything kind of organized in the way that you might normally keep it organized. Another thing is to contain the chaos. New debates with new Affs tend to be chaotic. It can be hard to figure out what the affirmative is saying, what arguments are most important, what articulations of things that they are talking about are kind of the most important to pay attention to, and it's important that you kind of have an idea of how to contain this chaos. The third piece of advice I have is call out the BS. New Affs, especially later in the year, will often be very small, very squirrely. They might have advantages that don't make a lot of sense. They might be full of stuff designed to knock you off your feet and get you off your game. Just don't be afraid to point out that that's true. Go with your gut and your instinct. And worst case scenario, fake it till you make it. I always had less confidence in debates against new Affs. It's just harder when you haven't had the chance to prepare ahead of time as specifically as you do in other debates. But if you fake it and look like you know exactly what's going on all the time and that you're extraordinarily confident that everything you're saying is true and that the advantages that they've presented are total BS, then it will have the effect on the judges of thinking that you are right. That's true in any given debate, but especially in debates where a lot of new stuff is flying around. That's going to be a really important thing to do, is control the narrative and project confidence. Finally, take prep early and liberally. Take as much prep as you need to establish a 1NC that can win you this debate. Take prep to adapt your generics to what the 2AC has said based on the new Affs spin they've got. Take that prep early, because setting yourself up for a successful 2NR is going to be more important than having a bunch of time right before the 2NR to try and correct your mistakes. And if you've done this well, then you will need less prep time later in the debate to be able to figure everything out. If there's anything you kind of take away from this lecture, I think that it's that preparing ahead of time is the most important thing you can do to debate new affirmatives, and that remembering that you know how to do this and that it's the same as any other debate is going to give you the time and confidence to succeed in new Aff debates. So I hope that this is helpful and this helps you win some debates next year. And as always, I am open for questions if you need to ask your lab leaders for my email or anything like that.